Let me tell you, I want to, before we begin the message this morning, what a joy and honor it is to be here today with you. And I just want to personally thank you. You didn't have to be here today, and you didn't have to take the time out of your schedule and your life to be in this place. So I personally just want to say thank you. And I pray that your time here this morning, this hour we spend together, gives you something that maybe you didn't walk in the door with. Maybe some hope, maybe some encouragement, some strength, maybe some direction or purpose, some understanding, some freedom. Whatever Jesus needs to give to you today, I pray in my spirit and my heart that you'll receive that with open arms and open hands. Because I truly believe that Christ, because He is the cornerstone of our lives, He is the foundation of the world, He has something to give and offer all of us who are broken, desperate sinners who just need Him today. So, may grace and mercy and peace be to you, dear friends, in Jesus on this Easter morning. As we celebrate that the tomb is empty, Christ is alive, and so we are now beloved sons and daughters of the King. You know, growing up as a kid, Easter was a favorite time of mine with my parents, and so during the Easter season, I started thinking like different things that kind of go on with family and friends, and started thinking about my parents. And I really started thinking about something that my parents would often say to me throughout my life, and it was this phrase: "Well, that was dumb." Well, that was dumb. Or, "What were you thinking?" was another phrase. Or, "That wasn't your shiniest moment, now was it, Dave? That was a little bit foolish." Like for example, the time that I really believed that I was Superman. And I honestly thought that, right? And so we were living in Asheville, North Carolina. We were in this 2-story house. My bedroom was up on the second floor, kind of overlooking everything, and there was this huge maple tree with limbs going out everywhere. And I thought, how cool would it be to jump out and fly over to that tree? Okay, so I opened up the window, got my Superman cape on, right? I'm about 8 or 9 years old, right? Kind of open up the window, look at the tree, kind of look down and said, man, this is going to hurt if I fall, but let's give it a try. I think I really am Superman, right? So I'm about to jump out the window at the tree when my dad grabs me jumping out of the window to that phrase, "Well, that was dumb." But see, it didn't just end in childhood, those dumb, foolish moments. When I was in college, I bought a television. It was my very first television. Had that television for a good, about 10 years or so, and did not want to get rid of that television, to the point that the button that turned the TV on was missing. It was gone, and I didn't have a remote control to turn the TV on. So I had this bright idea. Let's just take a butter knife, stick it in the hole where the power button was, fiddle around a little bit till it clicks on. Hey, worked great, right? Till that moment I realized that I'm sticking this in an electronic piece of equipment with about 120 volts of electricity running through it. That may not have been the brightest moment. And that was just last week. Okay. Or that moment that I could just see the look on my father-in-law's face when my car wasn't running correctly, it wouldn't crank right. We were living in Arlington, Texas, and I took and I always saw this on television. If you just hit the engine a few times, it'll run correctly, right? So I took out this lug wrench and I started banging it on the battery, and I said, "Watch this, Jim, it'll turn right on. Just get in there and turn the thing on." So I start just banging on the battery, right? And he turns on, car works, right? And of course, here's this engineer looking at me. That wasn't the smartest thing in the world to do. No, it probably wasn't. Okay? So we all have those foolish moments. All of us have those moments, well, that was dumb. Okay? We have those moments that we kind of look back on and go, that was not the smartest thing to do at the time. Okay? But hopefully we also have some moments that are just a little bit wise. Okay? A little bit where we recognize maybe we should ask for help. Okay? Like, for example, when the roof is leaking and you hate heights. That's when you call somebody who likes to work on roofs and to get up there, because I don't, okay? Or when you realize that when somebody comes into your office and they got a situation and it's beyond your pay grade, okay? That's when you go, you need some help from somebody else because I just can't do it, okay? And every once in a while we have some wise moments. And that's the tension we live in, right? Foolishness and wisdom. Maybe doing some things right, doing a whole lot of things not so right. We've seen the effects of dumb mistakes, and we know that every once in a while we may get it right. But in a world that's constantly changing, constantly filled with challenges and struggles, and increasingly more difficult to live this life as a follower of Jesus with the destruction and chaos that we see throughout the world, we need something more, okay? And I truly believe this. We need something more in life that gives us a firm footing, a solid foundation for living life. We need something that allows us to weather the storms, because we all have them. And if we don't have a strong foundation, we crumple and we crash and we burn. And I believe that the resurrected Jesus, based on what he has done throughout history and in my own life, has exactly what we need. So let's look at it together. Here's what Jesus says, okay? One day Jesus is teaching and preaching and healing people, and there are just crowds. I mean, just like triple, quadruple, all of the folks in this room, just crowds are following Jesus. They are astonished by the things that he taught. They are overwhelmed by the miracles he performed. He would take people who had diseases, and they would just be gone in an instant. He would take folks who had struggled with demonic oppression and possession and just deliver them from those evil spirits. He would take people who were suffering from seizures and epilepsy, and just in a moment, they would be free. He would enable people who were paralyzed from the waist down, from the neck down, who had no use of their limbs, to walk and use their arms in a moment. And the more that Jesus brought comfort and relief, the more that Jesus healed and delivered, the more that Jesus changed people's lives, guess what happened? The crowds grew and they grew and they grew. To the point that Jesus says, guys, I need a timeout. I need a break. I need about 5 minutes to myself with the Father in heaven. So he goes up onto a mountain, okay, so that he can have some solitude all by himself. Well, unfortunately, he had 12 little mice that traveled with him, okay? And these 12 disciples who couldn't find their way on their own, like, well, dude, there goes Jesus. We better go with him, because if he goes up the mountain, something may happen, so we better go with him. And so they travel up the mountain too. And Jesus looks, hey, you guys couldn't stay down there? You couldn't, like, wait for me? Well, if you're here, we might as well accomplish something. So he sits them down, and for the next hour, just starts to teach them. Starts to pour everything in himself into them. He starts talking about marriage and divorce, walking with God, what the kingdom is. He starts talking about sexuality and purity, blessings and trials, prayer and worry, what it means to put God first in the kingdom and his plan for their lives. Now, we call this teaching the Sermon on the Mount. And what we're going to do here at Good Shepherd for the next several weeks is we're just going to pour into this teaching and allow Jesus to pour back into our lives. We're just going to kind of walk through it together and just sit at the feet of just the most incredible teacher to ever live. But as we do that, we're going to need to see how much the resurrected Jesus is the one who builds a solid foundation in our lives to weather storms and trials and the uncertainties of the future. But rather than start at the beginning of the sermon, we're going to start at the end. It's kind of like opening up a really good book and going to the final chapter, reading that first, and then working your way back through. That's what we're going to do this morning. And so we're going to look together at this end of the sermon. It's Matthew chapter 7. It's going to start in verse 24. So if you want to pull out your pew Bibles and look at it, you can. If you want to open it up on your phones, you can. Matthew chapter 7, and we're going to be right in verse 24. It's just a couple of verses that we're going to look at this morning. Here's what Jesus says. Jesus looks at his friends, and he says this. Now, granted, this makes sense for Jesus being a carpenter's son. He says, therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine, puts them into practice, is like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because he had as his foundation was the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and doesn't put them into practice is like a foolish man. And that foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew, they beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Now that's a familiar story. That's a simple parable, and yet it's a game changer for life. It absolutely changes the way you look at life. And let me explain. Two men, and you can put two women in there if you wanted to also. Two men, two women, however you want to describe it. Here are these two men who have a simple goal in life: to build a home, to build a family. One decides they want to do it right there on the beach so they can feel the sand in their toes and the water hitting up against their feet when they walk out in the morning. The other says, I want to be able to look overside the ocean and see that beautiful view of the sunset from the rock cliff. Both are seeking to build a life for themselves, for their family, for a place to enjoy and live and breathe and grow. Anyone in this room ever wanted to do that? You want to build a home. You want to build a family. You want to build a place to live. You want to build a place where you can call, this is your rest, this is your sanctuary, this is where we grow, this is where we live, this is how we interact with one another, right? This is what God is calling in the moment, right? And so these two men, they both seek to build this, but there's something else they share in common. They both have to experience storms. They both have to experience storms. Whether you realize it or not, it's been 4 years since we had that incredible outbreak of tornadoes here in Alabama, 2011. 4 years ago, the state of Alabama experienced one of the largest tornado activities in the history of our country. I can still remember sitting in the hallway. There, Beck and I were there. The boys had their helmets on, got the mattress over us, got the radio going, got some food that's lined up, and we're just waiting, weathering the storm, wondering, is this big, huge tornado that just wrecked Tuscaloosa, that went through all of North Birmingham and heading straight into Fultondale, is that coming our way? And not only is it coming our way, what about of all of our friends? What's happening in their homes? And so as that tornado ventured through, we finally were able to go out. We were finally able to get out of our home and see what the destruction, the path that was left. And I was just overwhelmed by the homes, the businesses that were completely gutted and in shambles. I remember going to a friend's house that was right there in Fultondale, okay? Right behind the Whataburger, where the new Whataburger is, where the Target shopping center is, where just leveled that whole area back there. I remember standing in the living room. There were no walls, okay? And I remember the gal who was living there said, man, if you look up in that tree over there, there's my roof. And if you look up over there, there's my couch. And what was funny, they visited with us on Easter Sunday, and they said, look in the cabinet drawer of the only two cabinets left in the kitchen that was left from the tornado, and it was the two coffee mugs we gave them on Easter Sunday 4 years ago. It was in that moment that I realized something. Storms can be devastating. And as people, we realize that we go through our own storms. We know people who are going through storms. We know people who are living through them right now, if it's not ourselves. Let me just share a couple with you right now. I have a friend. She texted me this week on Facebook. She said, would you please pray for my dad? We found out this week that his bone marrow is no longer working, and he has 3 to 6 months to live. You guys probably know her. Her name's Erica, and this is her father. I had a friend who texted me earlier this week. He's a guy I've met. We've become pretty good friends. He said, my wife called me at work today and said she's leaving. We're getting a divorce. What do we do now? I have another friend who we've been talking with this week, and he's in absolute denial about being a junkie, won't get the help he's needed, won't get into a recovery program, can't seem to find his way. I had another friend who came to me this week, kind of through a random acquaintance, through another friend of the church. She came into the office on Wednesday when we were working here at church. She used to work at Subway in Gardendale. And we were talking, and she'd come in because she needed some help with one of her power bills. She was just really struggling. I said, well, what happened? You had this great job at Subway. What happened? She said, here's what happened. He said, my manager and I got into a bit of a conflict over scheduling and time, and it was just really becoming extremely more than I could handle. And so I had a day off, and I scheduled on that day off to take to 4 Angel Tree families presents for Christmas. And it was the only day I could do it. My boss called me on the day off and said, if you do not come in, you'll be fired. And I just made a decision. I felt like God was telling me to take the presents versus my job. And she got fired on the spot 4 days before Christmas. Storms are real. Storms in life are real. And these storms can involve suffering, they can involve pain, they can involve challenges to what we believe as people, they can test our faith, and they can even damage our spirit. But Jesus says there are 2 outcomes to these storms in life. There's 2 ways to approach these storms in life. Either A, our world can come crashing down and we are left in rubble, or my foundation can stay intact even when everything else comes crashing down and I can rebuild. One is wise and the other is foolish. So what is the difference? What is the difference maker in the moment? So let's look at the foolish man first. This is what Jesus says about the foolish man. He says, this is the man who built his home on sand, which isn't very smart. In fact, that's what the morons do. Sands shift. Sands move. Sands have no security. Only a fool or an idiot would build their house on sand. And Jesus describes it in this way. That's exactly what we do when we take what Jesus has to say and we let it go in one ear and, say it with me, out the other. We let it go in one ear and out the other. Jesus is literally saying, listen, you hear me, but you're not listening to me. You hear me, but you're not taking what I've said and put it into practice. And so over the next few weeks, what we want to do is kind of get really practical about these teachings of the Lord. And we're going to deal with some real-life examples of marriage, conflict, anger, sexuality, prayer, worry, work, and money. And we'll just let Jesus teach us. But this morning, what we're going to do is wrestle with a simple question. Why? Why would anyone listen to Jesus and just let it go in one ear and out the other? Why would we take what Jesus has to say and just ignore it? Or put it off to the side, put it in a box, put it back in the closet? I don't actually know why sometimes, truthfully. But I can tell you why I've done it in my own life. And if that relates to you, if that resonates with you, that's good. Let me just tell you why for me. Why are there moments in my own personal life that I listen to Jesus and I go, I'm not going to do what you say? I listen to Jesus and I said, I don't want to hear that. I listen to Jesus and go, nah, that's not what's going to happen. Let me just give you 3 reasons. Number 1 is confusion. Confusion. When I don't understand why God is asking some particular action, attitude, or belief. I just don't get it, God. And I'll give you an example. When God says this, Jesus says this, love your enemies and pray for them, right? There's a confusion on my part, okay? Because that's not how I want to treat my enemies, right? That's not how I want to speak to them. That's not how I want to care about them. That's not how I want to relate to them. Love them? Are you kidding, God? That is the last thing. I want them to run off in a ditch. I want them to burn in a fiery fire, right? I want them to fall off, a ladder and break their neck, right? I want them to, die of arsenic poisoning, right? Maybe I'm being a little extreme there, but I know you've thought about it. There are those moments when there's people in our lives that we cannot stand, and we hear Jesus say, love your enemies and pray for them, and we are confused by that, and we don't want to do it. Now, there's a second reason. There's fear, okay? Fear. God, you're telling me this, right? But I don't want to change. I like who I am. I like what I do. If I listen to you, that may mean something in me has to change. And regardless of who we are, most of us are fine with change as long as it doesn't involve me. Everybody else can change. Everybody else can get their junk together. But if you tell me I got to get my junk together, there's something wrong with you. You're the problem, right? Fear. Okay? Fear. I don't want to change. I don't want to do things different. And so when God talks, I'll just give you a good example. I know, God says, your body is a temple. So honor the Lord as you honor Him as a temple. Well, God, that probably means I have to eat healthy. And I don't want to do that, right? That means I have to change my diet and the way I eat and the way I do things, right? And there's a fear inside of me because I don't want to change, all right? That's number 2. Then I'll just give you the last one, which everybody can relate to. I'm a good German, which means I am stubborn, okay? All right? And when we are stubborn with God, we simply say, God, I like things my way. I don't want to do it your way. And so we hear, and then we let it go out one ear because we don't want to do it. But I started thinking about these 3 things. Confusion, fear, stubbornness. What do they all have in common? Anybody relate this morning to those 3 things? Confusion, fear, stubbornness. I started asking God, what's kind of the common denominator of all these things? And what God has shown me is that truthfully speaking, if I'm going to be honest this morning, and I hope you will too, truthfully speaking, deep down inside of me, and I believe inside of all of us, it's a core belief that drives these 3 things. It's a core belief that causes us not to listen to Jesus or follow Jesus. And here it is. Here's the core belief. I believe that I'm a better God than Jesus. I believe I can do this better than Him. I believe I can plan my life out and figure things out better than Jesus. I believe I can make my own path in my own direction and my own way without any help from the Lord. I believe that I can do things better than God. And I believe that I know what's best for me rather than God. And then instead of hearing Jesus and doing what He says, I want Jesus to hear me and do what I say. Because I believe that I'm a better God than Jesus. And if you're honest with yourself, you probably do think the same thing. We all do. It's the idol inside of us. It's what condemns us. It's the foolishness of man. It's exactly what Jesus says in John chapter 3. He says, I came in this world, Jesus says, I came into the world not to condemn people. That's not my mission or my purpose or my desire. I came not to condemn people. I came to save people. But the problem is simple, is that people don't believe in me, Jesus says. And because they don't believe in me, they stand condemned at the door already. And so I'm condemned to this foolish life of sinking sand that leaves me ultimately wrecked and broken when death comes knocking at the door. But Jesus says there's another plan, there's another road, there's another path, which life can be built upon, which a rock can be the firm foundation and establishment. It's the path of the wise man. See, Jesus says the path of the wise man is the one who hears Jesus and believes Jesus and does what Jesus does. So this morning, what I'd like to do is I want to give you 3 words this morning, maybe a 4th one as a bonus. I want to give you 3 things this morning that I want you to hear because this is what Jesus says. Then I want you to maybe kind of learn to believe that to be true so that we can do these things. And here's the first one. It's finished. It's finished. Will you say that with me? It's finished. It's finished. It's over. The work of Jesus to save the world is over. The work of Jesus to forgive sins is completed. Everything Christ needed to do to save me and save you, even though we believe that we could do a better job than God, is completed and finished. It is finished under the cross and by His grace. Therefore, His promise to me and to you is that He has come, the work of setting captives free, to bind up the brokenhearted, to release us from our sin. It's finished in this moment. It's finished. Second word, He is risen. He is risen. Jesus isn't dead anymore. He's not dead in the tomb. He's not a decaying body. He is alive. He is risen. He showed himself to his disciples that he is alive because God is in the business of bringing dead things back to life. And what God wants you to hear this morning is he is in the business of taking you, who is dead, and bringing you to life. And I want you to think this morning, is there something dead in your life today that needs to come back alive? Something that needs to be rejuvenated, renewed, and restored by the power of grace. Something that needs to be encouraged and strengthened that maybe you've lost hope in for the future. Let it come alive. That's the second word. The third word is this: peace be with you. That's what Jesus said to the disciples. He said, peace be with you. Look, you don't have to be afraid of God. You no longer have to be worried about God. God is on your side. He is for you because he cares about you and loves you. If you ever think that you have disappointed or you're disapproved by the love of God, he says, forget about it, man. You have peace with God because of Jesus. And it's those three things that make a foundation that I don't care what is thrown your way. You may have to do some rebuilding. You may have to do some fixing up. You may have to do some rehab work when the storms come. But the foundation is still there. The foundation is still there. So what do you do with those three things? And maybe a fourth one is rest. Rest in Jesus. Stop worrying so much about what you got to do and just rest in Jesus. But let me give you three things to do today. And they're simple. Number one, just believe this. Believe it. Believe that it's finished and you don't have to earn God's love. Believe that he is risen, and because he is risen, so shall you. Believe that you have peace with God, and therefore that peace can extend to your family and your friends and the relationships with other people. Believe that you can be at rest in Jesus. So what I'd like you to do, and I know this sounds crazy, start actually believing these things. Because once you believe them, here's what you do second. You start shaping your life, your family, your home, your work, everything around them. And then here's the number three, most important part. Never stop reminding yourselves these things every single day, because you will forget them, and you'll forget them. And you will start believing again that you have a better plan than God does. He is risen. It is finished. Peace be with you. Let's pray. Father, Easter is about Jesus. And Jesus wants to build a foundation in our lives. A foundation that is strong and secure, a foundation that even when the storms come, even when the pain comes, even when the brokenness comes, even when all the junk is flying through the windows, the foundation is still strong, it's still secure. It can take whatever life throws at it. And then you're there to help rebuild, to put back the brokenness of our lives, because you have finished everything. You are risen from the dead, and you give us peace. I pray, Lord, that for anyone who's just kind of struggling with these concepts, struggling with these beliefs, who's got that inner core belief that doesn't actually trust the gospel, man, you start us on a journey today of trusting in the gospel, trusting in the work of Jesus, working through our own personal confusion, our lack of understanding, or personal beliefs that kind of get in the way. And we just hand it over to you and trust in you so that our lives can be strong in you. In Jesus' name we pray, and we all said together, amen.